Hi everyone, my name is Professor Joseph Wong and I'm going to be an instructor for Education 40. To kick us off this week, we're going to be covering behaviorism and social cognitive learning theory. This particular video is the first of a couple of videos in the series for behaviorism. And we're going to be covering a couple of different topics, which include some basic assumptions about behaviorism, classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and some real world applications. So you might notice that my deck is a little bit different. We're going to be using a myriad of different education technology platforms in this course because it is an online course. And I hope you bear with me and I hope you enjoy the experience as well. And so we're going to go ahead and get started with some of the basic assumptions. So first of all, what is behaviorism or the behaviorist approach? So, behaviorism, also known as behavioral psychology, is a theory of learning which states that all behaviors are learned through interaction with the environment through a process called conditioning. And so conditioning can be summed up as in behavioral psychology as a theory that the reaction or the response to an object or an event, or in this case a stimulus, so a response and a stimulus by a person or an animal, can be modified through a process called learning. So we can kind of associate the word conditioning with the process of learning. And this paradigm of conditioning often includes repetitive, constant learning in order for a stimulus to then cause a response. And so we're going to continue on with these, but before we get started, I want to cover 5 different assumptions related to behaviorism. And so the first one is that all behavior is learned from the environment. We just mentioned that a little bit, but the environment influences our behavior. You can think about like where you grew up or how you act in a classroom versus how you might act at a job versus acting with your friends. The environment influences the way we as humans behave. And innate or inherited factors have very little influence on behavior. What that means is that our biological predisposed or genetics that we've inherited from our parents or from our ancestry in the view of behaviorism has little influence on behavior. And so the behaviorists or behavioral psychologists at the time thought that our minds as humans are in a blank state when we are born, and that it's constantly being shaped by interactions within the environment. And so example I have here is that I learned to like boba because boba was in my everyday environment. It wasn't necessarily something that was genetic. And growing up in San Francisco and then also moving to SoCal for college, for undergraduate, and for my graduate degree, boba was always around me. Every time I had boba, I always felt really happy. And so boba wasn't something that was necessarily passed down to me through genetics, but it was something that was in my environment that shaped my behavior for liking boba. And so another assumption I wanted to cover is that psychology should be seen as a science, as many different types of learning theories were coming out at this time period between the early to late 1900s. Psychology really saw a shift into being more of a rigorous science. So this is where theories could be supported by empirical data obtained through careful and controlled observation and measurement of behavior. This was really where we started to see psychology shift into just being purely theoretical to measuring, to gathering data, to analyzing and conducting experiments. And so psychology as a behaviorist view is purely objective, excuse me, and an experimental branch of natural science, and that its theoretical goal is prediction and control. And if you've ever taken a statistics class or maybe the ed research class, you'll see that a lot of what we do in quantitative statistics is to look for predictions and how we might control for these different variables when we're running an experiment. The third assumption I wanted to cover is that behaviorism is primarily concerned with observable behavior as opposed to internal events like thinking and emotion. So it kind of goes into this concept of what is observable is measurable. And it's not to say it's not necessarily considering emotion or affect or motivation in this case, but the behaviorist lens or the paradigm really focuses on what scientists can see, how they might measure it, and how might they make sense of that kind of behavior. So behavior can be objectively and scientifically measured. So it's really looking at that stimulus and response to see, okay, what just happened based on the environment that that person or animal might be in. And so this particular lens of behaviorism really sees learning as a change in behavior due to experience. We're going to cover a multitude of topics of different learning theories, and not all learning theories see learning or behavioral change or learning as a change in behavior due to experience. Another assumption is that there is little difference between the learning that takes place in humans and that in other animals. Behavior psychologists at this time were really focused on analyzing and measuring and documenting evidence. And while many psychologists were working with humans, a lot of research was happening with animals at the same time. At this time, they were thinking that there is no fundamental or qualitative distinction between human and animal behavior. Now, we all know that may not necessarily be true, but at this time, they were looking to perform a multitude of experiments with animals. And so, think with this in mind, rats became a primary source of data for behaviorists as the environments could be easily controlled. And lastly, the last assumption I want to cover on this topic is that behavior is a result of stimulus and response. Now, we've heard these two terms a little bit already as I've mentioned them, but all behavior, no matter how complex, can be reduced to a simple stimulus and response association. And so, what we mean by that is there's something in the environment that is causing a stimulus, and our behavioral change is that response. And behaviorism really tries to examine that association between what's happening in the environment that is causing a stimulus and then what is causing our reaction or reflex or our change in behavior as a response. So Watson described the purpose of psychology as to predict, given the stimulus, what reaction will take place, or given the reaction state, what the situation or stimulus is that has caused the reaction. So I have a little picture of Xing Fu Tong boba here. And one of the big things that I love about boba is just that moment where it's kind of like a treat. And so when I go ahead and order a boba, it just makes me feel so happy. It gives me an instant reaction of feeling joy and feeling happy. And I can share it with my friends or maybe just enjoy it for myself. Something about boba is causing a reaction in my body to feel happy and to feel joy. And so we're really trying to examine that stimulus and response here and like identifying what exactly are the components that make up this stimulus and reaction association.